go ahead and use the mic. Hey, I'm Klaus Dansberg, and my book is Honoring Aging Parents, How to Grow Up and Mom and Dad Grow Old. And what it's about, if you're overwhelmed with parental caregiving concerns, you don't have to make every mistake yourself. You can learn from others, and so this is our book. We wrote it. Well, the book was gestating in my mind for probably 20 years, and I'll give you the background on that. So my personal experience is I'm an aerospace engineer. I lived in Huntsville, Alabama. Actually, my dad, I'm born in Germany. My dad came over here with Werner von Braun, and he was the program manager for the Saturn V that took us to the moon. And so I reluctantly followed in his footsteps, but it turned out to be a good decision. I liked it. And so I worked for, launch vehicles, satellites, airplanes, unmanned vehicles, missiles, helicopters, you name it. I've always been on the electronic side of it. I got a degree in aerospace and 2 degrees in electrical engineering. That does not qualify me to write a book about getting old. What qualifies me to write a book about getting old was my wife and I spent 14 years taking care of her parents. Father-in-law had congestive heart failure, and her mother had Alzheimer's, so we had one good mind and one good body between the two of them. And that was tough. And in those 14 years, we spent 7 years living in our home. Then when we got to the point where we were having too many incidents, and we were worried about endangering one or more of us, we decided we need to go into assisted living. Went into assisted living for a couple of years. That worked pretty well. And then my father-in-law needed to go into a nursing home. He had some physical problems, and my mother-in-law couldn't live by herself, so she went into memory care. So he was lived another year in a nursing home, and she lived another 3 years in memory care. So that's one side of preparing us for the book. The other thing that prepared me was my dad remarried 18 months after my mom passed. My mom passed when she was 78, younger than I am now. And my dad, we didn't really realize what kind of condition he was in. He remarried a year and a half later. And he remarried a lady that was 50 years younger than him. He was 78 and she was 28. And so, as you can imagine, that created some unique situations. A lot of unique. There's a whole book there. I'll give you a little bit of the background on that in a little bit. But that's my dad passed in 2009. She remarried a couple of years later. We still stay in touch with her. We had 5 really, really rocky years where neither of us could get along with the other. And we had 5 years that was kind of peaceful, and then 7 years where we got along really well. And so they were married 17 years before he finally passed. But a lot of funny stories there, a lot of good stories. Motivation for writing. When we found out we were going to have to be taking care of my wife's parents, did a lot of research, and the research I did was generally about the financial situations. It wasn't about the emotional situations, and there's a lot of emotion involved in trying to take care of, especially an Alzheimer's, patient that's can't remember things, and then I admire my father-in-law for the time he spent trying to take care of her when he was physically not very able. But so we spent a lot of time there, and everything we encountered was not really the real problems we were having. And all the advice and all the books, the financial stuff was all cold and impersonal, so that was not very helpful. On the other hand, in experience with a new stepmother who was the same age my son's girlfriends were, which, like I said, creates some awkward situations. And there's a lot of funny stories. Most of them have good outcomes. All of them don't.
I'd like to see that book.
But that was a whole different dimension. And so my wife and I kept periodically saying, you know, somebody ought to write a book about this stuff. and so many crazy things came up that, and I looked, I mean, I probably read easily 30 books on, you know, taking care of parents. And none of them really fit the situations we were in. None of them prepared you for the situations we were in. And I'll give you some examples of that in a few minutes. Anyway, so that when the time was right, I began writing. And when the time was right, it was after I retired. My wife's parents had both passed and my dad had passed. And so they were all out of it, nothing to embarrass them. And nothing was written in order to embarrass anybody. It was written in order to help other people. And I think we've accomplished that. And by talking to others, I soon recognized that a lot of other people had similar experiences, and some were similar to our experiences, some were different. My wife and I are both only children, so we didn't really have the experience of having to deal with siblings. So along the line, I decided I needed to get a co-author and to include some of these other stories and include these stories in a way that would be more helpful than just the specific situations that we had encountered. So my co-author is Bruce Black, and Bruce was a friend from Virginia. We lived in Virginia at the time, through most of this time, when we took care of our parents. And he is a good friend, fellow tennis player. He's a preacher for our church where we lived in Virginia. I say Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area. We don't acknowledge the Washington part of it. And he had also recently retired. He was looking for something to do. So he's 15 years younger than I am, but we get along just fine. And he and his wife had just gone through a tragic experience where her husband had died, and she was kind of the glue that held her community together. And then all of a sudden she had a stroke, and she didn't recover from the stroke, and she had to be taken care of. And you know, they tried to do that from a distance for a year or two. It didn't work. So eventually they wound up, you know, moving, rearranging their life. So he had a different set of experiences than we did. It was a good set of experiences. And he had siblings. He had 3 siblings, and some of them got along and some of them didn't get along. So he had good and bad experiences there that we can include in the book. So our approach, once we agreed to be co-authors, we had weekly phone calls to discuss what kinds of things we wanted to talk about, how we wanted to organize them, what kind of format we wanted to use. And the format we used generally was, you know, what I would call, if you like to read, I can't think of his name. He wrote, he was a Christian author, C.S. Lewis. He had a book, in one of his books he said, you know, a lot of times the students can help other students more so than the teacher can. The teacher talks about, you know, the theory and all that. Students talk about real experiences and how to really do things, and that tended not to be the case with us. Neither one of us was, you know, really academically prepared, professionally prepared for this, but we had experiences that we could share that would be helpful to other people. So we discussed, you know, what format to use, and the format largely was give some experiences in a particular phase of life, and then draw some conclusions from that. And that turned out to be, you know, easy to read, so it's not hard to read, and that was one of our objectives. Then we agreed on sections to write and to review, and then we would email exchange sections, go back and forth, read it, comment, discuss it again, and then eventually when we were ready to go forward, we got a third party, you know, a paid editor who went through it. And again, good thing there is she knew none of the background about either one of us. So things that made sense to us didn't make sense to her because she wasn't part of it. And she'd point those things out and we'd correct them, and that was great. So a couple of examples, and Joan, I'm not going to read them, I'm just going to talk about them. but just the kind of things. And the first one is the big unveiling. At the time, my dad was living in Huntsville, Alabama. He was retired. My mom had been dead for about a year and a half. We were living in Richardson, Dallas, North Dallas area, and he was coming to visit us. And he was coming, flying in on a Sunday, going to leave the following Sunday, and on about Wednesday, so he'd been here Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. About on Wednesday afternoon, he and I were coming back from somewhere, and he had just moved. He had just moved his location. He sold his house. He and my mom lived for a bunch of years, and moved into a townhouse. And we had been out there recently and helped him with a townhouse. And so we were in the car together, just the two of us, relatively close to home. I mean, this was orchestrated. This was not accidental. Relatively close to home. And he said, by the way, did I tell you I'm going to hire an assistant? I said, an assistant? That's crazy, Dad. Why are you going to hire an assistant? He said, well, you know, I've been wanting to write my memoirs, and I'm secretary for a couple of professional associations, and got a lot of Excel work I've got to do, a lot of Microsoft Word work I've got to do, yada, 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 yada. And I said, About that time we got home and quit talking about it, went in the house. That was on Wednesday. On Thursday, we were in the same situation. We were in the car, coming back home, and close to home. He said, by the way, did I tell you my assistant's going to live with me? I said, no. That's the craziest thing you've ever heard. I said, well, I got this big house. You were just out here helping me. We got a second bedroom in it. I don't use it. I don't need it. It doesn't cost me any money. And yet it's worth $1,500 a month. So it's a good deal for both. It doesn't cost me anything. It saves me $1,500 a month. Oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. And so then, that was Thursday. On Friday at dinner time, we were sitting around the dinner table with my in-laws who were living with us at the time. And I asked my wife, I said, hey, did Dad tell you he's going to hire an assistant? She said, no, he didn't tell me he's going to hire an assistant. What do you need an assistant for? He said, well, she. I said, she? What do you mean she? He said, oh, I didn't mention it was a she? He said, no, you didn't mention it, Dad. So I went and called my cousin, who I call her sister because she lived with us for 10 years. I went and called her, and she said, oh, so he told you about her. We were betting he wasn't going to tell you about her. I said, yeah. So he's leaving on Sunday. So we had a day to kind of mull it over and think about it. On Sunday afternoon, taking him to the airport, I told him, I said, Dad, I don't know what the deal is with this assistant, but I don't really care. I don't want anything to come between us. I want us to maintain the good relationship we've got, yada, yada, yada. I said, just don't do anything stupid. He said, what do you mean stupid? I said, don't marry her. I said, oh, no, nothing like that. You're just going to type, do Excel spreadsheets, yada, yada, yada. I said, Dad, I don't want to hear it. Just don't do anything stupid. Oh, no. On Monday, he called and was engaged. They're getting married in 2 weeks. So, the lesson learned out of that was the loneliness. And I've talked to a lot of people since then about that. And mentioned it in the book. You don't realize how lonely people get. So we addressed that, and it's an important issue, and it was a real issue with like I said, a lot of funny stories. There's a whole separate book there, but it was a real issue with him for a while. We didn't realize we weren't sensitive to it, which I look back in hindsight and kick myself. So that's the one example that's in there. Is one of the examples. The other example. What I call checking in. When my in-laws were getting up in age and they were relatively impoverished, so we were trying to get them qualified for Medicaid. There's funny stories there too. We were trying to get them qualified for Medicaid. In order to get them qualified for Medicaid, the social worker told us, well, the first thing you need to do is separate their assets. So separate as his and hers. So then what you need to do, for all these different reasons, and Medicaid's different in different states, so I don't know what it is in Texas. You need to set up a burial account for each one of them. So when all the money's gone, there's still going to be enough money to take care of the final expenses. So, okay. So they have lived together for, pushing 60 years, more than 60 years, with one checking account, and now all of a sudden they need 4. Near death, they need 4 accounts. So, okay, no big deal. The social worker said do this, so we're going to do it. I went to the bank to try to open a couple of other accounts. We had my mother-in-law's power of attorney. My wife had it. And it turned out that the bank wouldn't honor the power of attorney. You probably don't know, banks don't have to honor powers of attorney. That was a real surprise to us. And they read us this clause in the power of attorney. They said she's entitled or empowered to do anything that they would normally do in their daily living. Says, well, in their entire life they've had 1 checking account. Now they need 4. That's not something they would do in their daily living. And so we got to take my mother-in-law down there, who was not rational. She had Alzheimer's. And she was allowed to make her X, and they accepted her X, but they would not accept the power of attorney. So again, pay attention to the legalese and figure out what it means. That's one of the lessons we got out of that. And so kind of to wrap up, I self-published the first time the book with Amazon in 2017, and that was a good experience. Made more money doing that per book than doing it myself. 2 years later, after no brick and mortar books would carry the book, and again, that's something that's not that commonly known, but the brick and mortar bookstores, think Amazon is their arch enemy, because Amazon sells more books than any of the bookstores do. And so, we finally decided to go republish the book after it had been out for a couple of years, published it through a publisher, and that turned out to be a good move. We were somewhat leery about it because of the cost, obviously, but we just reinvested what we had already made off of the book, so that wasn't that big a deal. That was a surprise. That's something you stumbled into by accident. Despite publishing it twice, the book's been profitable. We've done pretty well with it. But again, the real satisfaction has been the people we've helped. And we've helped a number of people that have bought it here at the ranch. A number of them have saved several $100,000. But, give you some examples of that if you want to talk about it afterwards, but it's not appropriate here. And a number of people who have gotten through some difficult situations with it. And so, if anybody needs any help in that regard, I'm happy to help. But that's my story. I'm self-publishing a book. I thought it was a good experience. I'm not sure I'm ready to do it again.
Okay.
Yeah. That's it?
That's it. Keep it
Anyway,
close.
what I was saying was the best way is, kind of just through the introduction, more or less. And I need to tell you that, I'm not an anatomist, I'm not a histologist, a pathologist, I'm not a proctologist, I'm not a toxicologist, pharmacist, let's see, psychologist, sociologist, pediatrician, and I'm not a heart doctor, not a surgeon, not an ENT, I'm not even a GYN-OB, as far as all that goes. That's a lot of ologists, if you think about it. I'm really all of those things to everything that bites, stings, or crawls. I mean, if you put it in a shoebox or a horse trailer, I've seen it. If there's a mailbox out here with a reflector on the side of the road, I've been in the driveway. It might have been midnight, but I've been in that driveway. So, after 42 years of clinical practice, from big ranches to horses to dogs and cats, I've treated everything from a goldfish to an elephant. And you never know what's going to walk through door number 2. Which one do you want to choose for the day? And that's kind of where it all started. You get these stories whether you want them or not. And when you're in the midst of them, they're probably not funny. But, you know, a few years later, you better have a really good sense of humor because they'll knock you down. And all of a sudden it'll come back to you. And when I started writing these stories, they just started coming out. Most of them I had forgotten. I was just working, you know, 18, 20-hour days, all day long. Now, I started out on the King Ranch. I was head of the cattle feeding quarantine down there. I got into their breeding operations and into the horse business. Stayed down there a couple of years. I came up to the Pitchfork Ranch, which is right next door to the 4-6s, which a lot of you guys will be seeing on Yellowstone now. The producer of Yellowstone just bought the 4-6 Ranch. It was owned by Marion Bennett, and she was heir to Exxon. It's a nice little spread of about 625,000 acres. King Ranch is a little over 1 million. So from the big ranches, I came up here and I went into a practice, and basically it was 50-50 small animal and horse. And my horse practice continued to expand. Got bigger and bigger and bigger. My last horse practice that I built was right down here on 1171, multi-duplex. And I built that hospital back in the 80s, somewhere in there. Well, like I say, you never know what you're going to run into or when you're going to do it. Now the books, I have 5 of them. And in each book, there's like, oh, I don't know, 25 of these little short stories. You know, 5 to 6 pages, because I write just like I read short. You better grab my attention quick. If my old English teacher knew that I had written a book, you couldn't plant grass on her grave. It'd be turning constantly, you know, because I was the kid that walked into class and your term paper's due, and I've got the towel on my palm. You know, going, oh, I'll get it. You know, I'll have it done. You only have a semester on the day it's due. So, needless to say, I probably overheard a little bit of an apology. I learned to write by writing. That's the best advice I can give anybody that's ever thinking about writing a book. If you think you know how to write, you are out of luck. So I didn't write for a group. I didn't write for an age group. I just wrote these stories. People say, do you embellish them? Most of them I had to calm down some. You know, just to make them almost believable in a lot of cases. But anyway, I mean, just to give you an example, and it really doesn't matter in my profession whether you got 2 legs or 4. You know, I've never had an animal come into the clinic alone. They drag these 2-legged things with them all the time. So I'm very often kind of wondering, which one am I treating? And I give you, you know, not really reading, just a quick example that came to me when we were driving up here. You know, I go in the exam room and there's a lady there, she's about half hysterical, you know, and she's got this 20-pound Persian cat laying there on the table, and he's not really overweight for an 8-pound cat. He weighs about 20 pounds, you know, and I got to be polite, you know. I said, oh, you look good for an 8-pound cat. We don't put him on a scale. And he's sitting there looking all around the room, like that, you know, not paying a bit of attention. She's almost in tears. So I'm assuring her that we're going to find out what's wrong with her cat. So anyway, I mean, I'm examining the cat. This cat's normal as rain. There's nothing wrong with this cat. And he's looking at me like, you know, I was laying on the couch. I was watching Animal Planet. She snatched me up. She brings me in here. She puts me on this cold table. I can't get comfortable. You keep mashing on me, all over me, you know. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how do I tell her the cat's going to, you know, be fine? She ain't going to believe that. So I just look at the cat and I start talking to the cat. I just ignore her and she calms down because she thinks I'm soothing the cat. So there's a psychologist that jumps out sooner or later, you know. And I mean, this cat's looking at me like, you know, if you just get rid of her, hell, I'd be all right. And that's, you know, that's just a simple little nothing, you know. And then you go out and you work about 100 head of horses. We bred almost 1,000 horses a year. Most of it by artificial insemination, which did 6 $1 million stallions that they're insured for. And then I go back into the clinic. And there's a preschool teacher. And I walk in there and I'm looking very professional. Stethoscope around the neck, white smile. Now I'm looking good. There's a bowl on the table. So I looked at her, and I looked at the bowl, and I looked at her, like, okay, what do you want me to do? It's a goldfish. Now, it's hard to look real professional when you're on a bowl chasing a goldfish. Round and round and round and round and round. And so I asked her, I said, you know, what's the deal? I said, you know, she said, well, he swallowed a pebble. And it's one of those little blue-looking pebbles off the bottom of the bowl. And you can hold him up like you do an egg. And you can see that pebble. There's the pebble. And she wants to know if I can do surgery on this goldfish. I told her right up front. I said, the last fish I operated on, I ate. So, anyway, I got to figure out how to get the goldfish, this rock, out of this goldfish. So my first inclination was, why did you bring me a goldfish? And why didn't you just go get another one? It cost you a quarter. And he was a little tiny color, real distinctive. She said, oh no, kids will know the difference.
Oh.
You've got to say, this goldfish, no pressure. No pressure at all. So, I finally catch this goldfish. And I'm looking at it, trying to figure out how am I going to get the pebble out. So, I'm a Texas Aggie, by the way. So, a little Aggie ingenuity. I decided that if I took him by the tail, and if I shouldn't, that pebble would fly out. Didn't work. So then I got to thinking, well, you know, if I hold him down in the water long enough, well, when he comes up, he'll look for air, and he'll spit the pebble out. Have you ever tried to drown a goldfish? You can't do it. I'm the one turning blue, holding the fish in the water. So I said, well, that ain't going to work, you know, anyway. So she says, you know, about that time, goes, can you do surgery? No, we're not going to do surgery. So finally I decided that if I shook him, get him like this, I mean, when I shook him by the tail, his eyes started rolling like a slot machine. He was dizzy. Put him in there and he'd flip over backwards, upside down, everything. Finally, I just very simply, I took him and I just squeezed him right in the middle. And you know how a fish puckers like that? Every one of y'all just did it. And so I started squeezing him just like that, you know. It's instinct. And I was able to take like an instrument, a hemostat, reach down in there real quick, pull the little pebble out, dropped it in a stainless steel bucket. Phil Western with the bullet. Bing, 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 bing. Put him in the water, swam off. Everybody's happy it's a water. Then you got to go up front and charge for that. So these are the things I got into. Just, you know, from spaying raccoons, to cougars, to an elephant, to the goldfish, and then 99% of my practice was fishes. So, like I say, it doesn't matter if it's two-legged, four-legged. Each one of these books has about 25 of these little 5 to 7 page deals. The thing that I found out, because I didn't write for an audience at all, was that I have a lot of diversity age-wise. My youngest clients are 12, 11, and 12 years old, and there's a story behind that I'll tell you in a minute. My oldest client is a West Texas rancher. She's just turned 98 years old. She's read everything I've got. She identifies with every story I've got and has at least a dozen more to tell me. Wow. If I just have time to sit and listen to them, because she's got that experience. It's all just experience. So anyway, when I started writing, I started catching different age groups. You know, I figured I'd catch the wannabe veterinarian, high school, junior high, 14-year-old girl barrel racer, you know, that kind of crowd like that. And what's really caught me by surprise was I caught all the granddaddies.
Oh, wow.
You know, and they were reading like crazy because a lot of them were West Texas ranchers, and they were the ones that gave me the stories. And so, anyway, they enjoyed reading about themselves, basically, because they had experienced that too. You know, they had held the gate when the cattle ran over them, like this, under the gate, you know, and Daddy's hollering, hold them back. But anyway, and then the kids popped up. And we got on this program. It's called Accelerated Reader Program. It's through the schools. And that's basically where, we've got teachers in here, you probably know what it is. It was basically designed for the teachers to evaluate the reading skills. The kids read the book, and they take a little 10 question deal at the end of it, and they get X amount of points. The books are rated by age, and they're rated by points, being difficulty of reading and comprehension. But the thing that I got from the teachers was that they're funny, they're short, and they're animal. So if you want to get a kid to read something that doesn't like to read, they can identify with those animals. And where I really hooked them was especially boys. Girls will sit and muddle into something and get going, and they'll enjoy it over a period of time. They'll give it a benefit of the doubt. A boy, you either grab his attention in the first half a page or you've lost him, especially if he doesn't want to read. So, but you can take one of these little young cowboys out here that see daddy doing this all day long through these ranches, or you can take a city kid, talk about a dog or a cat, they've got a pet, Next thing you know, they're trying to bandage a leg on them, kind of stuff like that. But that opened up a whole new audience for us through the school systems and that kind of stuff like that. So I guess my point is, it's a good gift for dad, and they're good gifts for kids. You can sit down and read a chapter a night. Every story is 100% totally different. Okay, I never know what's going to walk in the door. And everything has to be immediate. When they come in, I have to diagnose it, treat it, and have it better heal pretty quick. Time-wise, I've usually got more than about a minute and a half with a client in order to start figuring it out. It's kind of not like us when you go to the doctor and they want to refer you and you get an appointment 4 weeks from now. Kind of deal like that. It's pretty SPE. And my patients can't talk. You have to develop a sixth sense. So in the books, you'll go from a big cattle ranch to a kitten, to an armadillo, to a racing mule, to a quarter-horse breeding ranch, to a turtle. They're all, I've got all of them in there just like that. And that's my day. So that's the way I write them. Books are inexpensive, $15 a piece or something like that. They're kind of in a little bit of a series, but you can read one without the other. It's not a big deal. It starts off kind of at the beginning of the career, goes right up to today, more or less. But anyway, just have some fun. That's all it is. After 40 years of this, you better have a good sense of humor. They're going to teach you to have them. Let's put it that way, whether you want it or not, kind of thing. I got some bookmarks up here. Anybody ever wants to order any or anything like that, there's a little sample chapter on the back, kind of gives you an idea. Something like, let's see, Miracle on Sugar Hill is the name of that one. And that's about a big fire that occurred just right down the road here at one point in time. And of course, the barn was in the broodmare barn with all the babies. And so we had a big to-do on that. But anyway, they're challenging, but they're kind of funny. Up here at 2, I have one of the books is on audio. And I did the narrative, I did the reading. We had, I went into a friend of mine who used to make car commercials. And he had a studio. I didn't know what he did. And we were talking about it. And I said, I'd like to put one of these books on audio someday. He said, well, come on over. I'll put it on there. Okay. So anyway, we got in there, and he had all these sound effects. He had anything we wanted to try to do. He got into it, started having fun with it. Everything that I couldn't afford to hire somebody to do, let's put it that way at the time. And so we had 2 readers come in, and they were very monotone, very professional, very voiceover type individuals. And he said, do you want to read it? And I said, sure. So I got in there and started reading, and kind of like when I go to Missouri or somewhere, I don't have an accent until I get there. And all of a sudden, everybody's going, well, what Texas you from, boy? So I guess I do. The twang and the Texas and the implications and I know the stories, and so the accent part of it and everything like that. Okay. There's 5 CDs in these things. They run 5.5 hours of these little 10 to 15-minute reads. Okay. And so I brought some up here, and if anybody still has a CD player, maybe this crowd might. You're more than welcome to have one. They're free. I brought some up here just to give people, kind of like a little door prize for coming. Okay? But it gives you a real good idea of what the books are about and who you might want to use them, as a gift or anything else. if you go across the website and you come into me, it'll come to me and I have a space on there. You tell me who you want it autographed to, what you want it to say, happy birthday grandson Jimmy, from Aunt Lala, or whatever you want on it. And you can personalize them. And then we have them individually, or you do a package, or whatever like that. I guess the big thing here is I just had fun. I mean, you know, really and truly, I could be at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still in there and let's just keep coming. Just keep coming, you know, over and over and over. So it's just a lifetime of what I cared about doing, was the bottom line. And so you can't make them up. I tried that one time, and my publisher called me and said, don't ever do that again. And then she said, write me a chapter like you talk. She was out of California. And she said I had an accent. And so anyway, she said, write like you talk. So I did, and she wrote me back, never do that again. I ain't never gonna. It's not a full sentence, is what she pretty much told me, even though I say it all the time. Anyway, that's all I got. If y'all have any questions, they're fun to read. You'll enjoy them, and the good thing is you can actually turn this right around and you can hand it to a grandkid. And you know, the whole family can just pass these things, you know, around. And so it's something to just kind of enjoy. So any questions? I'll be glad to take them. It's kind of all of it in a nutshell. Say the big, yes, sir.
How many legs did that fish have?
Well, barely had a tail by the time I got through. Let's put it that way. You know, all right, you see that like this, you know, doing this on the tail. But yeah, but it's got, you know, 2 legs, 4 legs, and a tail. Like I say, I run into them, they don't know which end's up. I can go in anywhere. Yes, ma'am.
What vet school did you graduate from?
Texas A&M. Yeah. And here's the fun part, and this is something I didn't know when I was writing, that these books are set on a 6th grade level. Okay? I have 4 college degrees, 2 bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate in veterinary medicine. I was at Texas A&M for 10 and a half years. I practiced for 42 years. On top of that, I write books on a 6th grade level. But you know, the funny part about that, and I didn't know this, I learned this after the fact, the average reading level in the United States is 6th grade. You know, and so if you get a thesaurus out and you start writing on there and looking for new words, oh, they'll nail you to the wall. My publisher went, don't throw that thing away. You know, you just write like you thought, like you lived, like you would want somebody to read. And it comes out on about 6th grade level. But that kind of makes it nice because you don't have to remember anything. You pick it up, you read for 10 minutes, and you go to bed. You know, just unwind, have a good laugh, and then the next night you pick it up and read something 100% totally different. And so it kind of, you know, but it keeps that short attention span, funny, short, and something, you know, we all got this at one time or another, and I've had everything from goldfish to horses. So anyway, yes, sir?
How did the elephant patient come about?
The elephant? I had a client that lived up in Salina. Most of my practice has really been in this area right here, Dallas-Fort Worth, 90% of it. He used to winter, if you can remember, they used to have an old show called Circus of the Stars.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that? They wintered at his place. And so he had an elephant up there, and what had happened was she had a chip in her ankle, and they'd taken it out, but she was a little bit lame on it, the sound, and they couldn't use her anymore in the circus. So he said, hey, just leave her here, you know, and so he built her a big pen. Funny part about that, one of the Dallas Cowboys at the time was out there visiting. He walked in that pen. That was a mistake. Her name was Molly. The guy weighed 280 pounds, and she wrapped that trunk around him and threw him about 40 yards.
Oh, my God.
You know, and just like that. And I mean, she was a massive, big Asian style. He'd bring me raccoons. He was one of those guys that just had a knack for animals of any kind. And so he was always getting me into. He adopted the cougar. I mean, people would remember the old Mercury car commercials. Cougar on the top. This was her cub. And she was in Washington State. And the Washington State found out that she wasn't a native, and they defunded her. And so this circus group, it's kind of a small crowd, so to speak, he found out about it. They were talking about putting her down. He said no. They sent her down there. She landed at DFW, and 2 days later we stayed and declawed a 120-pound cougar that had only been petted 3 minutes. That's a whole nother story. In a small animal clinic, if she got loose, it was for sale. Whoever had the guts to go get it, have it. But that's the kind of thing you get into. He tapped me on the shoulder at church and said, "Can you spay my cat?" Sure. Bring her in Monday. No problem at all. Crate comes in the size of this thing right here, and you can't see her. It's just got holes on the top, and you can hear her ricocheting.
Oh my God. Oh boy.
What have we gotten into now? You know, but it's a whole chapter on it. All right, anybody else? Quick. All right, I'll be around.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. My wife, Nancy, is here today. Nancy. But we've lived here only 6 months, so we're kind of new to the ranch. And we just thank everybody for making us so welcome here. This is such an amazing place to live, and we just love living here so far. My book, Fortitude, so far, well, great. Yes, as Joan said, my book, Fortitude, preserving 400 years of an American family's faith, patriotism, grit, and determination, essentially reads like a history book, covering 400 years of history from about 1600 to today. But what's unique about the book is the characters in the book are my ancestors. So rather than all the famous people that were around, these are just regular, ordinary people that were part of this American experiment from the beginning. So the book, I start in chapter 1 with just a brief etymology of the name Spalding, which I encourage all of you to go back and figure out the roots of your surname, which has been fascinating. So mine started with Anglo-Saxons in Germany in a tribe called Spald. And they came over and migrated into England when the Roman Empire fell and founded an area north part of England called Spalda, which became Spalding, England, which is a town that still exists today. So that goes way back into the 10th, 11th century. So I do that in chapter 1, but then I pick up the story with my 9th great grandfather, Edward, in chapter 2, with him coming from England over to the colonies as an indentured servant living in the Jamestown settlements. So I talk all about the history of what life was like back in the Jamestown settlements. And then after that, after he became a freedman, he migrated north to the Massachusetts Bay colony, and him and 4 of his friends founded Chelmsford, Massachusetts in 1655. So I have all that history of that and what life was like there in colonial Massachusetts, and then move the clock ahead about 100 years or so until the American Revolution started, and my 6th great grandfather, James Spalding, all 4 of his sons, one was my grandfather and the other 3 were my great uncles, all 4 of those boys served in the American Revolution. And one of my uncles was a Minuteman, and so he responded to the Concord Lexington alarm as a Minuteman and served at the first battle of the American Revolution in Concord and Lexington. So then I cover all that history, what was going on, the founding of the country, and what was my ancestors doing then, and all the way up through the War of 1812, and then fast forward again to the Civil War, and I have 8 of my uncles served in the Civil War. So that's a chapter in itself in the book because there's so much history there. So I tell their stories. I tell what's going on in the Civil War from the first shot fired at Fort Sumter to the eventual surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, and all through the war and through the stories again of my ancestors. One is sort of sad. My 3rd great Uncle Oscar was mortally wounded and died of his wounds from the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Virginia. So I have a lot of details I found out about his story, and mainly from traveling to the National Archives. Before Nancy and I moved here, we lived in Northern Virginia, right near Washington. I don't say the name, but we lived just 25 miles west of there. So I spent time in the National Archives and just holding the service records of an ancestor from the Civil War. When I opened that up, it probably hasn't been touched since the Civil War. And I'm reading about, my ancestors and holding these documents that were theirs. And it was, that was amazing. So that's where I got a lot of information to stories to put in the book to personalize it. So the Civil War period and Reconstruction and then turn of the century, World War I came along, and my great uncles and one of my great aunts all served in World War I. And my great aunt Florence has got quite a story. You have to read that in the book. She was quite a character, and after the war she actually became what's been said is the first female deputy sheriff in our country. This is in 1919 and 1920, and she was quite the celebrity, and people from around the country, newspapers would travel to Western New York to interview her, and she even got a full invite, all expenses paid trip to New York to watch the New York Yankees play the World Series, and she met Babe Ruth. Yes, and so you'll have to read the story. There's funny things she said about Babe Ruth that I will mention. So then, traveling on up to World War II, again, my ancestors had served in World War II. One of my uncles flew 50 combat missions on a B-17. During the war, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and so all his stories and others are in there. And then eventually I pick up my story in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, because I served in the military myself for 22 years in the U.S. Navy. And so a lot of those stories are in there, and our travels around the world. And the Navy, they say join the Navy, see the world. Well, it's true. I basically sailed in every ocean around the planet in my 22 years there. And then afterwards, I was an engineer with the Boeing company doing software and systems engineering. And then actually was in full-time ministry for about 8 years after that, planting churches around the United States and around the world. So I tell some of those stories as well toward the end of the book. So again, the bottom line is, with this book, is if you like history, and if you like stories of just ordinary, faithful, patriotic, hardworking people, then that's how the book reads, and it has resonated really with folks. Matter of fact, just last month in November, my book won a silver medal from Reader's Favorite, the 2023 Silver Medal Award here. Just last month, and so that was kind of shocking, but neat, because it's, again, I think people like reading stories of just the regular, ordinary folks. And also, I want to just make a quick plug for Ollie. Have you guys ever attended to Ollie? So I actually submitted a proposal to North Texas for Ollie to teach a course on crafting a family history narrative. So how do you take, some of you have been passed on boxes of records and pictures and stories and documents. And so how do you preserve that stuff? If you're like me, my kids don't want those boxes and stuff. But if you can convert the boxes into a book, it's permanent, right? I mean, you get an ISBN and an LCN number, the book's in the Library of Congress. That's what you go through. So it's there forever. So part of my inspiration, which Joan asked me, what inspired you to write the book? I was thinking, obviously, of my kids and my grandkids, but I was thinking hundreds of years from now, great-grandkids that someday can read this, so they'll know these stories. And that's what motivated me and inspired me. So in Ollie, it's late February. If you go to the course catalog for the spring, you'll see it here at Robson Ranch. And I'm going to kind of tell, how do you do that? How do you go from a box of papers or just beginning research to be able to publish a book? So I'll do that if you want to come to do that. Okay, do I have time to read a short?
You do,
read?
yes.
Okay, so let me just briefly read a quick story from the book. My glasses. Whisper help.
We all know that.
What's this about growing old stuff? If I look through these glasses, everybody's blurry, but if I look clear, it's nice and clear. Okay, a Spalding virtuoso. Albert Spaulding, born in 1888, was regarded by some as the first American-born violinist to gain international recognition. He was the son of James Walter Spaulding and nephew of Albert Goodwill Spaulding, co-founders of the A.G. Spaulding and Brothers Sporting Goods Company. Albert's story is told in his autobiography, Rise to Follow, published in 1943. Albert Spaulding studied violin in New York and Italy before attending the Liceo Musicale de Bologna in France. In 1902, at age 14, he received the degree of Professor of Music from the Bologna Conservatory, graduating with honors. Following his examination, the judges informed Albert that the only person to receive this coveted degree at such a young age was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. What an inspiring moment. Albert Spaulding's first American appearance as a soloist occurred in 1908 with the New York Symphony, conducted by Walter Damrosch, who announced Spaulding as the first great instrumentalist this country has produced. Thomas Edison once analyzed Albert Spaulding's violin sound with electronic instrumentation and found it to be the purest of any living violinist he had heard. Albert went on to record extensively for Edison Records label on 78 RPM flat disc records. Spaulding's musical career was temporarily interrupted by World War I after he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Private Albert Spaulding was assigned to the aviation sector, U.S. Signal Corps of the American Expeditionary Force. He departed the transatlantic crossing from the Aviation Concentration Center in Garden City, New York on September 18, 1917, aboard a commercial steamer contracted by the U.S. Army. Private Albert Spaulding served in logistics and maintenance for the U.S. combat aircraft in England and France. World War I was the first time that aircraft were used in combat. After all, that first flight of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk had occurred in 1903, just 11 years prior to the start of the war. At age 54, Albert Spaulding's patriotism once again was brought to bear when he answered the call to serve in World War II. This time, as a civilian, he was assigned to the psychological warfare branch of the Office of War Information. This unit used radio and leaflet propaganda to undermine German soldiers' morale. Albert Spaulding was fluent in Italian and several other European languages. His radio broadcast supported the Italian resistance and aided in the eventual liberation of Italy. Albert Spaulding was awarded the United States Medal of Freedom for his World War II service. This medal, first instituted in 1945 by President Truman, honored civilians whose actions aided the war efforts of the United States and its allies. During Albert Spaulding's service in World War II, a fascinating story highlighting the power of the music emerged. As an aerial bombardment of Naples, Italy in 1944 was underway, Albert Spaulding took cover in a cave shelter with hundreds of frightened refugees who were near panic. Here's how the story unfolded, as told by an eyewitness. Spaulding borrowed a violin from a symphony musician he observed in the crowd. As the first tones of the Beethoven Concerto floated unaccompanied through the shelter, the cries and the moans ceased instantly. By the time the concerto was ended, peace, calm, and quiet had been brought, if only for a brief space, to those wretched and unhappy people. Persons present on that occasion have written and stated that they have never heard such a great performance, nor had they ever seen the power of music so convincingly illustrated. So Albert went on to taught music at a university for many years before he died. So yeah, I just wanted to share that one story. So questions, I guess? Anybody have any questions for me?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to say, Fortitude, that's a great title for
Oh,
your
thank
book.
you.
Because not only the story itself, but the time for
Right.
you that took for you to
Yes.
research it all.
Yeah, it took, the research was about 30 years, off and on, not constantly, but off and on. When you're in the military and raising kids and having a family, you don't have a lot of time. So off and on dabbling in 30 years, but when I finally retired, right, that's when you can get to work, I wrote for about a year. I got up early in the morning for about 3 or 4 hours a day for a year. And that's when I turned that box of all the research into a book, right, yes.
Did you work with an editor?
Eventually, once the manuscript was finished and I got a publisher, then I had a professional editor go through it. And that wasn't a very pleasant experience. You think you know how to write, but... Okay, yeah, sorry. Gatekeeper Press.
And did you have an agent help you, or did you?
No, I just connected with them, who they specialize in helping the self-published authors. So that's kind of what they do, help you get, from a manuscript to, cover design and formatting and marketing and all that. So they're great. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Did you start with genealogy? Was that your beginning?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So. Growing up, I didn't know anything except I knew my grandparents, but no one ever told me anything past that. I mean, I never asked, but no one ever told me. So once I got into my 30s, I started wanting to know the answers to that. So yes, I did. I started, who was my great-grandfather? And I did some research and found out about him, and I just kept going back and back. And the more I discovered, the more I wanted to know. And so, yes, it started with that. But then genealogy in itself, names and dates, is kind of, it's personal, but outside of us, it's boring. But when you find out the stories, that's when it becomes exciting. And then when you fold in history to the stories, then you have something. That's when a book kind of came out, is when I took the stories and folded in history, so you could get the context of what was going on at the time.
Where did you find the stories? You had the genealogy. You
Okay.
had the national
Yes.
archives.
In a lot of places, my kids would joke when we were raising them that when we'd go on vacation, they would say, "We're actually going to hunt for dead Spaldings." Yes, we are. And I turned them loose in the grave, started, "Dad, I found another dead Spalding! Let's go find out who that is." So that's what we did. We traveled around, hunted for dead Spaldings. But I went to these small New England towns, and you go in and the little town hall with just 2 little old ladies working in there. You tell them who you are, and they start pulling out all the records and showing you all these things. And so, yeah, most of my research was pre-internet. And that's what a lot of the good old-fashioned legwork in libraries and town halls and the National Archives, and then the internet kind of helped kind of get it across the finish line, for sure. So, yeah, good questions.
Okay, does anyone have any open discussion, questions, or comments? Would you like us to do more of these?
Plug your website.
Okay, so I got some cards here. My website, just my name, dalespalding.com, and tell them a little bit more about the book. But I have a blog too. I call it Fortitude Continuing the Story, because it never ends. The story never ends. So I blog about history, and each time I try to show how an ancestor might intersect with that moment of history. So that's my post. I post once a month. So if you like history and stories, my website, dalespalding.com, you can subscribe to my blog. I post monthly. But I got a card here if you just want it.
Okay, so Klaus, your book is available through Amazon?
Yep.
Your book is available?
Basically, anywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon, but but Gatekeeper Press puts it out. Anywhere people sell books online, it's available hardcover, paperback, or ebook.
Okay, and your book is available through your website? Which is on your bookmark. Okay, and all their books are here in the library, one copy only, though, so you can't all be together. And as we look forward to your
Yes.
Okay, anything else? Yes.
For veterinarian, there were 2 authors I really enjoyed a long time ago. One was Dick Francis, wrote stories about jockeys in England, and there was usually a murder mystery involved and so on. And the the other was the All Creatures Great and Small.
James Garrett really was the one that kind of opened up the genre.
Oh,
The
okay.
whole, that deal. Got a lot of comparison from him, over, different articles and stuff, as far as my books go. Mine are a little shorter stories in particular. He had a habit of, he started describing the Moors and all, he kind of floats along it. But he was by far, his real name was White, Gene White. And he actually, what happened was, years later, he wrote under a pseudonym name because he didn't want to embarrass his family. 3.5 million copies later. I said I would love to have that kind of embarrassment. But he actually got run over by a herd of sheep.
Oh, my.
And he got tangled up in a gate and busted his hip up and ended up getting bone cancer.
Oh.
His son now has that old clinic and is a veterinarian, and they turned that clinic, I have never seen it, but they turned that clinic into a museum. And then he built a new clinic right next door. So I've gotten bits and pieces, of that comparison. Same general kind of stories, It's day-to-day work. You go to work and here they are. So yeah, I'd love to have that kind of problem.
Okay, so a lot of us here are dog owners. We have a big dog park, and a lot of dogs.
Sure.
Any advice on what we should absolutely not do with our dog?
Wow.
Or that we should do?
Yeah. No, I think, as far as animals go, is that you got to realize most of the training and everything is just strict repetition. The animals get confused when you're saying it one way and he's saying it another way, and they're saying, they're like, they want to obey, they just don't know the rules. You got to understand it, and they have to be anything harsh or anything, just, day-to-day routine. And, I think really there's no right answer or wrong answer to that, okay? I think just enjoy it.
Yeah, I think we all do that.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be, got all these weird breeds and stuff now, you gotta be, fashionable pets or whatever. And far as I'm concerned, just go down dogs and do it in. That's the way I want it.